The Grand Canyon never looks the same twice. That's what they always tell you. The light changes it. The season changes it. But no one ever tells you what it looks like at 2 in the morning, surrounded by law enforcement, while a sharpshooter across the road holds his breath and waits for a curtain to move. I was 23 years old. I had been living in that room for less than an hour. I didn't know the man across the hall. I didn't know what was behind his door. And I didn't know, not yet, that 60 feet below where I stood, something was happening that I will spend the rest of my life trying to unsee. This is not a ghost story. What I encountered that winter at the South Rim was not a creature, not a shadow at the tree line, not something I couldn't name. It was something worse because it had a name. It had a face. It worked the same job I worked. It ate in the same cafeteria, and it had been right there the whole time, while we smiled and said good morning and went about our ordinary lives. Some places don't show you what they are until the season changes and the crowds go home. That winter, the Grand Canyon showed me exactly what it was hiding. This is Frostville. Stay with me. I had been working at Grand Canyon National Park since the summer of 1987, hired through Fred Harvey to handle guest services at the Rim. It was one of those jobs you take when you are young and not entirely sure what you want from life, but you know you want to be somewhere that doesn't look like everywhere else. The canyon delivered on that. Every single morning I walked to my post, I had to stop myself from standing there with my mouth open like a first-time tourist, because the thing never looked the same twice. The light changed it, the season changed it, the time of day changed it. It was the kind of place that made you feel very small, in a way that was almost comforting rather than frightening, and I think that is what kept a lot of us there longer than we originally planned. When my summer contract ended, I signed on to extend through the winter. Most seasonal employees cleared out after Labor Day. The crowds thinned, the temperature dropped, and the park took on a completely different personality. The Rim villages became quieter, and the staff who stayed behind got to know each other in ways you never really do during the chaos of summer. You had to. There were not enough of us left to keep our distance. Right after New Year's Eve, in January of 1988, I was moving into my assigned company housing on the second floor of one of the employee residential buildings. The west end of the building faced the canyon side, which sounds more dramatic than it was in practice. Mostly it meant wind. The winter wind at the South Rim has a particular quality to it that I still have not found a word for. It is not just cold. It presses against the glass and against you in a way that makes you feel like the canyon is reminding you it is still out there, whether you are looking at it or not. My roommate had been assigned to me rather than chosen, and his name was Gary. Gary was one of the most deeply religious men I had ever met, and I mean that in the most literal sense of the word. He had come to his faith the hard way, through a period in his life he referred to only in general terms as the years before, and whatever had happened during those years had produced in him a level of religious conviction that expressed itself mostly as certainty. Gary was absolutely certain about who was going to hell. It was almost everyone. He would stand at Mather Lodge during slow hours and look out at the visitors moving along the Rim Trail, and he would do a quiet running commentary under his breath about the spiritual condition of basically every person he could see. According to Gary, he and I were among the very small percentage of people on Earth who were on the right side of that accounting. I was not particularly religious myself, but Gary had decided I qualified, and I was not going to argue about it. It seemed safer not to. Before we go any further, if you're new here, welcome to Frostville. Hit subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss a story. Like this video if it's keeping you up, and don't go anywhere, because what I'm about to tell you next is the moment that winter changed everything. We had been assigned as roommates for a practical reason that had nothing to do with spirituality. Gary did not use drugs, and neither did I. That might sound like an unremarkable coincidence, but at the Grand Canyon in those years, it was genuinely unusual. I want to be honest about this because I think people who did not experience that particular place in that particular era might not fully understand how pervasive it was. If you were a Fred Harvey employee at the South Rim in 1986 or 1987 and you did not participate in recreational drug use, you were in a very small minority. I am not saying this to be sensational. I am saying it because it is true, and because it is necessary context for what happened next. Gary had used drugs before his conversion and then stopped entirely. I had simply never started. So there we were, the two non-users, assigned to the same room, trying to make it work. We had barely finished stacking our things against the walls when there was a knock at the door. I was the one closer to the door, so I opened it. Standing in the hallway were three men. One was a deputy sheriff in his regular uniform. The other two were in full tactical gear, which at the time meant heavy vests, helmets, and weapons at the ready. I had never had SWAT officers at my door before. I do not think anyone really expects that experience when they are in the middle of unpacking a duffel bag in company housing at a national park. My brain took a moment to catch up with what my eyes were seeing. The deputy did most of the talking. He told me, in a tone that was calm but left no room for discussion, that there was an active crisis situation in the building and that Gary and I needed to leave immediately. He did not tell me what kind of situation. He did not elaborate. He said we needed our shoes, our coats if we had them, and nothing else. He said it calmly. He said it the way people say things when they have said them many times before, and they need you to do what they are telling you without spending time asking questions. I got my boots on. Gary got his coat. We went outside. The cold hit us the moment we stepped out of the building. January at the South Rim is not a gentle experience. The temperature was well below freezing, and the wind was doing what it always does up there, which is find every gap in whatever you are wearing and work its way through. But the cold was not the thing that held my attention once we were outside. Across the street, on the balcony of another employee housing building, there was a man with a rifle. He was positioned in a way that made it very obvious he was not there by accident. He was settled into a shooting position, and as I watched, I could see him sighting along the scope toward the building we had just been evacuated from. Then he pulled back slightly from the scope and went still. I understood later that he was waiting for a command or a clear view. At that moment, standing on the street with Gary beside me, all I knew was that there was a sharpshooter across the road, and he was looking at our building, and the deputy who had knocked on our door had not told us why. Gary decided immediately that the devil was involved. He said it quietly and with complete conviction, the same way he said most things. I did not disagree with him out loud, partly because I did not have a better explanation at that specific moment, and partly because Gary and I had an understanding that I was not going to argue theology with him in a crisis. He had a point, in a sense. Whatever was happening inside that building had required law enforcement to surround it with armed men, and that was not a small thing. I had spent months working at that park, and I had never seen anything like what was unfolding around me on that quiet winter street. One of the officers came over and told us we could sit in the emergency vehicles parked nearby because of the cold. Gary and I climbed into the back of one of them, and that is when we started hearing the radio. The officers in front did not turn it down or ask us to ignore it. Maybe they assumed we would not understand the shorthand. Maybe they had other things to think about. But we could hear it clearly, and what we heard made the cold feel worse, if that was possible. They were doing position checks. One by one, voices came over the radio confirming they were in place, giving their status, saying what they could or could not see. Most of them could not see anything useful. The curtains in the apartment were closed, and that was the central problem. The sharpshooter confirmed what we had already seen from the street. He did not have a shot. Without a clear line of sight, he was holding. Everyone was holding. The building was surrounded, but no one could go in yet because no one knew exactly what they were walking into. Gary was muttering prayers under his breath in the seat next to me. I was staring at the radio like it could tell me something if I looked at it hard enough. There were long stretches of silence between the radio checks, and in those silences the wind would pick up outside and press against the sides of the vehicle, and I would think about who was inside that building and what they were doing in there. I want to try to describe what it is like to sit with that kind of uncertainty, because I think it is easy to read about something like this and not fully appreciate how slow time moves when you are inside it. I was sitting in the back of a police vehicle in the middle of winter at a national park. I had been evacuated from my own room 20 minutes after moving into it. There was a man with a rifle across the street, and I had no information, none, just the radio. And the radio kept saying negative, negative, no shot, holding, no movement. Gary prayed. I sat still and tried to breathe normally. Then there was a countdown over the radio. Short and flat, numbers going down, and then nothing. The radio went completely quiet. Not another word for several minutes, and those minutes were among the longest I have experienced before or since. Gary stopped praying, and we both just sat there in absolute silence, waiting for something to come through. The wind pushed against the vehicle. A light somewhere near the building was swinging slightly in the gusts, and the radio stayed quiet. When they finally came back over the radio, the tone had changed. There was controlled activity in the voices, the kind of professional calm that people in those jobs maintain as a discipline. But underneath it I could hear movement, coordination, the sound of something having already happened and now being processed. Gary and I looked at each other. Neither of us said anything. An officer came out of the building a few minutes later and spoke to the deputy near our vehicle. I could not hear all of it, but I caught enough. The word that came through clearly was girl, then Phoenix, then safe. It took some time for the full picture to come together, and not all of it came to us that night. But this is what had happened. 2 Fred Harvey employees, people who worked the same operation I worked, who lived in the same building I had just moved into, had driven down to Phoenix and taken an 11-year-old girl. They had brought her back up to the rim and had her in their room on the east side of the building, 1 floor below mine and Gary's, while Gary and I had been trying to figure out where to put our things, while the sharpshooter was waiting for a clear window, while the deputy was going door to door telling people to leave. That child had been in a room 60 feet from where I stood. The police got her out safely. One of the men who had taken her managed to slip away briefly during the operation, and there was a period where he was unaccounted for, which I imagine was not a comfortable situation for the officers on the perimeter, but he was caught. It did not take long. There was not far to go at the South Rim in January. The park closes in around you in the off-season, and a man running from law enforcement in that environment on a cold January night was not going to disappear. Gary and I were allowed back into the building after a couple of hours. We went back to our room and sat there for a while without saying very much. Gary eventually said that God had protected that child, and I did not argue with that either. Whatever the mechanism, she had come out of that room alive, and that was what mattered. We tried to sleep. I am not sure either of us managed it properly. I kept thinking about the room below us and the 2 men who had lived in it, and what the girl must have felt being in there while the building filled up with officers on the other side of a closed curtain. I thought about her parents in Phoenix. I thought about a lot of things that night, and most of them did not lead anywhere restful. What I did not expect was that this would not even be the worst thing that happened to me that winter. A few weeks later, I was in the residential corridor of the same building when one of the other Fred Harvey employees came out of his room and put something against my side. It was a knife. I know what a knife against your ribs feels like now because of that moment, which is not a category of knowledge I ever expected to acquire. The man holding it was not well. He was on something, clearly. His eyes were wrong and his hands were not steady. and he was insisting that I owed him $80. He kept repeating the amount, $80. If I did not give him $80, he was going to hurt me. He described how he would hurt me in very specific terms that I am not going to repeat, but I heard every word clearly because when someone is holding a knife against you, your hearing becomes very precise. I talked to him for what felt like a long time. I kept my voice even because I had some instinct that calm was the right approach, or maybe I was simply too afraid to let my voice do anything else. I told him I did not have $80 on me. I told him I could get it. I moved very carefully and he was distracted enough by whatever was in his system that I was able to create distance between us without it going further. Other people came into the hallway eventually and he backed off. He was removed from the property. I filed a report. I stood in a room with officers for the second time in a matter of weeks and described what had happened to me, and they wrote it down. And that was more or less the end of it as far as the official record was concerned. I stayed through the rest of that winter. I do not entirely know why. Maybe because leaving felt like letting the place win, or maybe because the Grand Canyon in winter is genuinely one of the most extraordinary things you will ever see if you can tolerate the cold and the isolation and the strange company. Gary was still there, still sending most of humanity to hell. Still certain he was on the right side of things. I did not have his certainty about much of anything by the time that winter ended, but I had learned something about what ordinary people are capable of, in both directions, and about how quickly a quiet building can become something else entirely, and about the particular way time moves when you are sitting in the back of a police vehicle in the dark, listening to a radio that has gone silent, waiting to find out what is on the other side of a closed curtain. Before I let you go tonight, I need to tell you something. What you just heard happened in broad daylight, in a national park, surrounded by other people. And it still broke something in the man who lived through it. The next story I'm going to bring you has none of that. No crowds, no other employees, no radio with voices on the other side, no one who knew where he was, just a man, a sealed concrete bunker on a highland ridge, fog so thick the world outside stopped existing, and at 3:14 in the morning, a knock at the door, his 6-year-old daughter's voice, 300 miles away, asleep in her mother's house, asking him to please let her in. The technician who came before him left one note, one instruction. Whatever you hear, whatever it sounds like, do not open the door. He kept it shut. He survived, but when he got home, he stood in front of his bathroom mirror and watched his own eyes, waiting for them to blink on their own. And the longer he stood there, the less certain he was about what he was seeing. That story is coming next. Stay where you are. At 3:14 in the morning, inside a sealed concrete bunker on a highland ridge 200 miles from anyone who knew my name, I heard my 6-year-old daughter knocking on the door. She was 300 miles south of me, asleep in her mother's house in Nottingham. I had spoken to her on the phone 2 days before, and yet there she was, on the other side of a double-bolted steel door, in fog so thick I could not see 2 feet beyond the glass, telling me she was cold, telling me to please let her in. Every instinct I had as a father told me to throw open that door. The note left by the technician who came before me, the man who supposedly went on extended medical leave, said one thing about this exact moment: do not open the door. Whatever you hear, whatever it sounds like, do not open the door. My name is Daniel. This is everything that happened to me at Station Bravo 14, and I am still not entirely sure that the man who got on the extraction helicopter is the same man who got off it. My name is Daniel Marsh. I'm 34 years old. I grew up in Coventry, the kind of unremarkable Midlands upbringing where the most exciting thing that ever happened was the ring road getting resurfaced. My mom taught secondary school geography. My dad worked for a telecoms company for 26 years and retired with a carriage clock and a lower back problem. I studied electrical engineering at the University of Manchester, graduated with a 2:1, spent 3 years with a contractor doing maintenance work on broadcast infrastructure across the north of England, then went freelance. I am not, and I want to be absolutely clear about this before anything else, a dramatic person. I don't embellish. I don't tell stories for effect. My ex-wife Sarah would tell you that one of my most frustrating qualities is my complete inability to make anything sound more interesting than it actually is. At dinner parties, I would describe holidays in complete chronological order and wonder why people's eyes glazed over. I once had a near miss on the M6. A lorry drifting into my lane at 70 miles an hour genuinely nearly killed me. And when I told Sarah about it that evening, I apparently made it sound like a mild inconvenience. I say all of this because what I'm about to describe sounds insane, and I need you to understand that it is coming from the most boring, level-headed, empirically minded person I know, which is me, which is why I still don't know what to do with it. I have a daughter. Her name is Ellie. She's 6 years old. She's obsessed with dinosaurs and strawberry yogurt. She has my nose and Sarah's stubbornness, and she is the best thing I've ever done with my life. She lives with Sarah in Nottingham. I have her every other weekend and every Wednesday evening, and those days are the fixed points around which everything else in my life is arranged. I tell you about Ellie because she becomes important later. In the worst possible way. In February of last year, I was in a bad patch financially. The freelance work had dried up over winter, it always does, and I'd taken on more than I should have during the renovation of our flat, which became Sarah's flat after the divorce, which meant I was now renting a 1-bedroom place in Derby with a boiler that worked when it felt like it, and a landlord who responded to maintenance requests on geological timescales. I had approximately £600 in my current account and a tax bill due in April. So when a listing appeared on a specialist contractor board for a remote communications monitoring technician at a posting in the Scottish Highlands, 6 weeks, full board covered, hazard pay that worked out to just over £4,000 after tax, I applied within 20 minutes of seeing it. The interview was brief and conducted over a secure video link with a man I knew only as Henderson, who had the energy of someone who had spent 30 years in a profession that required absolute discretion and had forgotten how to make small talk as a consequence. He asked me about my experience with magnetic recording equipment, my familiarity with RF monitoring systems, and whether I had any medical conditions that might be aggravated by extended isolation. I said no to the last one. He looked at me for a moment in a way I didn't quite know how to read, then made a note. The role itself was straightforward. Travel to Station Bravo 14, a remote relay installation on a ridge in the Northern Highlands. Change the magnetic recording reels every 6 hours. Log any anomalies in signal frequency or atmospheric readings. Do not adjust the equipment beyond what the manual specified. A resupply helicopter would come every 14 days. Communication with the outside world was available via a single encrypted satellite terminal for emergency use only. I asked about the previous technician. Henderson said he had left the posting early due to cumulative occupational fatigue and was currently on a period of extended medical leave. He said it in the particular way that British civil servants say things when they are telling you the minimum amount of information legally required and no more. I asked if I could speak to him before taking up the post. Henderson said that wouldn't be possible. I took the job anyway. £4,000, Daniel. Focus. The helicopter flew north from Inverness on a Tuesday morning in late February, and the further north we went, the more the landscape below us changed, from the relatively familiar patchwork of fields and forestry to something older and emptier and less interested in human presence. By the time we crossed into the area where the station was located, I couldn't see anything below except for an unbroken mass of gray-white cloud filling every valley and hollow, the ridgelines emerging from it like the spines of something enormous, sleeping just beneath the surface. The station appeared through the porthole without warning. One moment, fog and rock and absence. The next, a low concrete block, flat-roofed and militarily functional, ringed by a cluster of antenna masts that jutted from the ridge like broken teeth. A single red hazard light pulsed above the reinforced entrance door, with the slow, indifferent rhythm of a heartbeat. The pilot set us down on the landing pad and handed me a waterproof bag with the manual and access codes. He didn't make conversation. He didn't look at me in any way that suggested he was particularly happy about being here. The moment I stepped clear of the rotor wash, he was already lifting off. I watched the helicopter disappear back into the fog. Then I turned and looked at the station. It looked, I remember thinking, like a place where things got forgotten. Before I take you inside that station, do me one small favor. If you like long-form horror told slowly, the kind that creeps up on you and waits in the corner of your room after the video ends, hit subscribe and ring the bell so you don't miss what's coming next. And if you make it to the end of tonight's story, leave a comment telling me at what moment you would have opened the door. I want to know. Because there is a part of me that still isn't sure I would have kept it shut. Alright, let's go inside. The access code worked. The door opened with a pneumatic hiss, properly sealed with a compression mechanism I hadn't seen outside of soundproofed recording facilities. The interior was clean, warmly lit by the amber glow of the instrument panels and a single overhead fluorescent. The equipment was exactly as described in the manual. A primary and secondary reel-to-reel atmospheric monitoring unit, an RF spectrum analyzer, a radar display showing the topography of the surrounding area, a basic communications terminal, and a small living area partitioned off at the back with a cot, a kettle, and a chemical toilet behind a curtain. No trace of the previous occupant. Not a mug, not a fingerprint, not a dog-eared page in a book. The place had been stripped and reset with a thoroughness that felt less like good housekeeping and more like an erasure. I did a full walkthrough, checked all the connections, tested the reel mechanism, confirmed the backup generator was functional. Everything was in order. I found the note on my third pass through the bathroom. It was tucked behind the mirror cabinet, pressed flat against the wall, sealed in a clear Ziploc bag. The handwriting was precise. The handwriting of someone with a technical background, accustomed to labeling components and logging measurements, but overwritten with a tremor that had nothing to do with age. The kind of tremor that comes from months of sustained and unrelenting fear. It was headed simply, "For whoever comes next." I read it carefully, standing under the buzzing fluorescent light with the frosted window gray behind me. The note said that the station was acoustically sealed to 100%. That every external sound source had been eliminated, that if I heard any sound appearing to come from outside the station walls, from beyond the door, from the fog, it was not a sound, and I should not treat it as one, and I should not respond to it under any circumstances. It said that at 3:14 in the morning each night, I should turn off the radar screen before looking at it. That if I had already looked, and I saw a large white mass that appeared not to be moving toward the station but growing outward from it, as if the station was being enclosed, I should close my eyes and turn the screen off and not look again until morning. It said that if I heard my name called from the other side of the door, I should ask the voice to give me my employee reference number. That it would not be able to. That it didn't have access to my memory, that it had only taken my voice, and it could not take what it had never heard. The note ended with this: "I know how this reads. I wrote it that way on purpose. I would rather you think I was mad and follow these instructions than think I was sane and ignore them." It was signed with a single letter, E. I stood in the bathroom for a long moment. Then I laughed, short and genuine and a little embarrassed, as though someone had caught me startled by my own reflection. I put the note back in the bag, left it on the shelf, and went to make pasta. Honestly, Dan, 6 weeks? Get a grip. The silence in the station was unlike anything I had experienced before. I've been in quiet places. I've done overnight equipment checks in empty broadcast facilities. I've camped alone in the Lake District in November. I know what quiet sounds like. This was different. This was silence that had a presence to it, a density, as though the air itself had been changed in some fundamental way. By the end of the first day, I'd started speaking aloud to myself, not from loneliness, but from an instinctive need to confirm that sound still functioned, that I was still operating in a world where cause and effect worked normally. The equipment ran. The reels turned. I changed them at midnight, and at 6 in the morning, logged the readings. Ate, slept in 3 to 4 hour blocks. The radar showed the ridge, the valley contours, the occasional faint return from commercial aircraft far overhead. Nothing anomalous. On the second night, I woke abruptly at around 2 in the morning from a dream I couldn't hold on to and sat at the monitoring desk for an hour, watching the amber instruments in the dark. Just before I went back to sleep, I felt something. Not a sound. Not quite. A change in pressure, infinitesimally small, as though something very large and very nearby had shifted its weight. Like standing next to a lorry as it moves off from a junction, the displacement of air from something massive. I sat very still and listened to nothing. Then I told myself it was the building contracting in the cold and went back to bed. Everything changed on the third night. I changed the midnight reels, logged the readings, and settled in with a book I hadn't been able to concentrate on since arriving. My mind kept skipping off the words like a stone across water. The fog outside had thickened to the point where the red hazard light's faint bleed through the ventilation grill had vanished entirely. The world beyond the walls had simply ceased to exist. At 2:47 in the morning, the radio crackled. Atmospheric interference was common. I'd heard fragments of things since arriving, faint bleed from shortwave frequencies, what sounded like the ghost of a weather broadcast, once something rhythmic and indistinct in a language I couldn't place. I reached for the gain control to reduce the noise, and then I stopped, because the voice coming through the static was mine, not similar to mine. Not a voice in the same register, or with a comparable accent, or one that reminded me of myself in the distracted half-attention of nearly 3 in the morning. Mine. My specific voice. The slight flatness on my vowels that Sarah used to tease me about. The way I drop the ends of sentences when I'm tired. The exact rhythm of how I string words together when I'm frightened. The voice said, Dan, I'm in the basement. The maintenance level below the floor. There's something at the door down here and it's been working at the lock for I don't know how long. I've lost track of time. I need you to come down. I need you to come right now, please. I can't hold it much longer. I did not move for what felt like a very long time. Then, with the careful deliberateness of someone diffusing something, I reached for the note. The station is acoustically sealed to 100%. If you hear any sound appearing to come from outside, it is not a sound. The voice continued. And this was the part that genuinely frightened me. Not the voice itself, but what it knew. It described the basement maintenance level in accurate detail, the layout, the secondary generator housing, the water system access panel in the south corner. Details I had verified myself on day 1 and not written down anywhere. Details I hadn't spoken aloud to anyone. I sat on my hands to stop them shaking, and I thought, psychoacoustic manipulation. Somehow, and there was a rational mechanism for this, there had to be, a recording of my voice had been obtained and processed. There was a rational explanation. There was always a rational explanation. I checked the time. 3:11. I looked at the radar screen. I know exactly what the note said. I have no excuse. I looked anyway. The way you can't help looking at a car accident even when every sensible part of you says don't. and what I saw on that display has not left me in the 8 months since. The topographic return was normal. The ridge, the valley, the surrounding high ground. And in the center of the display where the station itself sat, where there should have been simply the building's radar shadow, there was a white mass, vast and shapeless and perfectly still, not approaching from any direction, not moving across the terrain, growing outward from the station itself in slow rhythmic pulses, like something breathing, like the station had already been swallowed and was now deep inside something that was slowly closing around it. I turned the screen off. At exactly 3:14, I watched the clock tick to it. The knocking began. I need to be careful about how I describe this because the nature of it matters enormously. If it had been frantic, hammering, desperate, violent, I think I could have handled it better. Adrenaline is a useful thing. It narrows the world down to a manageable set of options. But it was gentle. 3 soft, evenly spaced knocks, the way you knock on the door of a close friend's house when you know they're expecting you. Patient, unhurried, completely certain of its welcome. And then, from the other side of the reinforced steel door, which I had verified was sealed and double-bolted, came my daughter's voice. Ellie, 6 years old, in Nottingham, where I had spoken to her 2 days before and listened to her explain the precise defensive function of a stegosaurus's tail plates. The voice said, "Daddy, it's cold out here. Why did you close the door? Can you open it? Daddy, it's really cold." What happened to me in that moment is not something I can describe with complete accuracy because I'm not sure I was fully operational as a rational human being for the 30 or 40 seconds that followed. There is something in the human nervous system, something extraordinarily old, laid down long before language or reason, that responds to a child's voice in distress with a force that simply overwhelms almost everything else. Before I had consciously decided to move, my hand was on the bolt. I stopped myself. I grabbed my own wrist with my other hand and physically held it away from the door. And I made myself speak. My voice was shaking so badly I barely recognized it. I said, "What's my employee reference number?" Silence. Then the voice said, "Daddy, why are you being strange? I'm scared." I said it again. "What is my employee reference number?" A longer silence this time. And then something happened that I find almost more disturbing than everything else that night, because it was the moment I understood that whatever was on the other side of that door was not simply replaying a recording. There was a pause, a calculating pause. A pause with intelligence behind it, and then a sound I cannot accurately describe. Somewhere between a frequency shift and an exhalation, the sound of something resetting, searching, trying a different approach. I stepped back from the door. I looked through the spy hole. The fog was absolute. I could see perhaps 2 feet beyond the glass. In those 2 feet there was nothing. No small figure, no shape. Only the fog itself, moving with a quality that was wrong in a way I couldn't immediately name, moving with intention, coiling slowly around the base of the nearest antenna mast the way a hand curls around something it wants to pick up. I stepped back further and stood in the center of the room and waited. The knocking came again. Still gentle, still patient. 3 knocks, then Ellie's voice, then a pause, then 3 knocks. It had a rhythm to it now, a terrible settled rhythm, as though it had decided this was simply how the night was going to go and it was prepared to continue indefinitely. I don't know how long it went on. Time had stopped functioning normally. It could have been 20 minutes. It could have been 2 hours. And then the power went out. Not gradually. Instantly. Every light, every instrument, every glowing indicator gone simultaneously, as if something had simply decided it was done with them. The click of the backup system failing to engage, and then silence so complete it seemed to press against my eardrums from the inside. I had a head torch around my neck. I'd had the presence of mind to keep it there since reading the note, in the way you keep a life jacket close even when the sea looks calm. I clicked it on. The beam moved across the room. In the far corner, between the secondary equipment rack and the wall, was a figure. He was standing with his back mostly toward me and his head angled slightly downward, in the posture of someone examining something on the floor. Medium build. He was wearing the same standard-issue technician's coverall I was wearing, dark navy with the contractor logo on the shoulder. His hair was dark and cut short. As I held the torchlight on him, the side of his face became partially visible, and I understood immediately, with the cold certainty of something witnessed rather than concluded, that this was the man who had left the note. This was E. This was the previous technician who had supposedly left due to cumulative occupational fatigue and was currently on extended medical leave. He was not on extended medical leave. He was standing in the corner of my room, and his eyes, when the light caught them, were wrong in a way that I do not have the vocabulary to precisely convey. They did not reflect. Every human eye, every animal eye, every glass eye reflects light because that is what surfaces do. These didn't. The light hit them and went somewhere it didn't come back from. Two dark openings in a face that was otherwise entirely, horrifyingly normal. His mouth was moving. I could see it moving, the jaw working, the lips forming shapes, the mechanics of speech performing themselves. But no sound came from his mouth. The sound came from somewhere lower, from his chest, from somewhere interior, somewhere that should not have been producing sound at all. It was Ellie's voice. It said, "Daddy, why won't you look at me?" I have been over what happened in the next few minutes more times than I can count. I don't fully understand what I knew in that moment or why I knew it, but something in me, not logic, not reason, something older and more animal than either of those, understood the precise mechanism of what was standing in my corner, that it had no substance of its own, that it was built entirely from the reactions it produced in whoever witnessed it, that the moment I engaged with it, the moment I oriented toward it and treated it as real, it would become real in a way it currently was not. It needed me. Not my body, not my blood. It needed my belief. That was the only fuel it ran on. I closed my eyes. I pulled the foam earplugs from my top pocket. I always carried them for equipment testing, and pushed them in as deep as they would go. And then I sat down on the floor with my back against the base of the monitoring desk, my knees pulled up, my eyes closed and my ears sealed, and I started to talk. The only thing I could think of that would fully occupy the language processing part of my brain, that would leave no available space for voices or suggestions or the sensation of sounds that were not sounds. I recited pi, digit by digit, from the beginning, as far as my memory would carry me. 3, 1, 4, 1, 5, 9, 2, 6, 5, 3, 5, 8, 9, 7, 9, 3, 2, 3, 8, 4, 6. I kept going. I said each number in a steady voice, and then the next one, and then the next. I don't know how long I sat there. I kept my eyes shut. I kept my voice even. I recited until my throat was raw, and my voice had dropped to barely above a whisper, and I could feel the cold of the concrete floor through my clothes. The first gray light came through the ventilation grill at approximately 6:20 in the morning. I opened my eyes. The room was empty. The power had restored at some point. The instruments were running, the reels turning with their quiet mechanical patience. The radar screen was dark, as I'd left it. The door was sealed. In the corner where the figure had been standing there was nothing, not even a disturbance in the dust on the floor. I sat there for a long time without moving. Then I picked up the note, and for the first time I turned it over. I cannot explain why I hadn't thought to do that before, except that fear had apparently made me incapable of the most obvious things, and there was writing on the back, smaller, more compressed, the letters crowded together as though the writer had been trying to fit as much as possible into the space available. The tremor in this section was worse than anything on the front. The back of the note said, "You survived one night. I survived 10 years. I'm not telling you that to impress you. I'm telling you because I need you to understand what's coming. It gets harder, not easier. The thing learns. It gets better at the voices. After year 3, it started using people I hadn't thought about in years. People I'd forgotten I still cared about. You don't know how deep love goes until something uses it against you at 3 in the morning in a room with no windows." Then it said, "Last thing. When the extraction helicopter comes, and it will come on schedule, because the people who run this station are nothing if not punctual, do not board it until you have watched the pilot's eyes through the cockpit window. Watch them for at least 30 seconds. Healthy adults blink between 15 and 20 times per minute, involuntarily, without thinking about it. The things that wear people have not learned this yet. They do not blink. Check the pilot's eyes. Then check the eyes of whoever meets you when you land. Then check your own." That last line. Check your own. I read it 4 times. Then I folded the note carefully, put it in the inside pocket of my jacket where it has remained ever since, and sat down to wait out 11 more days. I am not going to describe all 11 in detail. Some of it I'm not ready to write, and some of it I'm genuinely not certain I processed correctly given the sleep deprivation and the accumulated stress. What I will say is that each night brought a variation, different voices, different approaches, different entry points into whatever architecture of feeling and memory the thing had been quietly mapping. On the 7th night, it abandoned voices entirely and simply produced sounds from beneath the floor, rhythmic and low and completely unidentifiable, like something very large breathing in a space that had no room for breathing. On the 10th night, nothing happened at all. Total silence, total stillness, no disturbance of any kind from 3 in the morning through to dawn. That was, somehow, the worst night of all. Because I spent 8 hours waiting for something that never came, which meant I spent 8 hours completely unable to distinguish between relief and the feeling of being watched by something that had decided it no longer needed to announce itself. I slept approximately 4 hours a night for those 11 days. I changed the reels. I logged the readings. I kept the earplugs in my top pocket and the head torch around my neck and the note in my inside jacket, and I functioned. On day 14, at exactly 9 in the morning, I heard the helicopter. I stood at the monitoring desk and I did not move toward the door. I watched the window. The helicopter resolved from the southern fog line exactly on schedule. A dark shape becoming a shape with edges becoming a recognizable aircraft, settling onto the landing pad 60 meters from the station entrance with the professional precision of a pilot who has done this particular approach many times. The rotors slowed. The engine note dropped. I stood at the window and I watched the cockpit. Through the rain-spotted windscreen I could see the pilot, male, 50s, in a flight helmet, going through his post-landing checks with the methodical patience of long experience. I watched his face for 90 seconds. Just his face, nothing else. He blinked 4 times in the first 30 seconds, twice in the next 30, 3 times in the last 30. Involuntary, natural, the small unconscious maintenance of a working human eye. Each blink slightly different in duration and timing, the way real blinks are, not the performed regularity of something trying to replicate a behavior it is observed but not understood. I shouldered my bag. I unbolted the door. The cold Highland air hit me after 2 weeks of recycled station atmosphere, and it was the most extraordinary physical sensation I can remember, wet and sharp, and carrying the smell of peat and elevation and the particular mineral coldness of Scottish cloud. Real. Irreducibly, provably real. I stood in the doorway for a moment with my eyes closed and just breathed it. The pilot climbed down to help with my bag. His eyes were brown, They crinkled at the corners when he gave me the brisk professional nod of someone who does this every fortnight and long ago ran out of things to say about it. He blinked twice, looking directly at me. I got on the helicopter. I did not look back at the station. I have not looked at any photograph of it since. I've told this account to one person before writing it here. An old university friend, Marcus, who is a structural engineer and as empirically grounded as I am, possibly more so. His first question after a long pause was the predictable one. Was I okay? Of course, I said. Tired but fine. Glad to be home. My daughter's actual voice from the next room while she watched television, embedded in all the real noise of a real house around it. Marcus said I seemed distant, a bit flat. Was I sleeping? I said I was fine. I made tea and we changed the subject and I drove home at 10 o'clock and kissed Ellie goodnight and sat in the kitchen in the quiet. And then, sitting there in my own kitchen under my own lights with the remnants of dinner on the table, I noticed something. The tap was dripping slowly into the sink. Somewhere outside a car alarm was cycling 3 streets over. The boiler clicked when it cycled. Through the ceiling I could hear the faint, familiar sound of Ellie turning over in her bed the way she does at least twice in the first hour of sleep. All those small sounds? The sounds of a lived-in, functioning, real place. And I realized, sitting there, that I had not consciously heard any of them since coming home. I had been back for 2 weeks, sleeping in my own bed, eating at my own table, living in my own flat, and at no point had I registered the background texture of ambient sound that every real and inhabited space produces continuously, which meant one of 3 things. Either I had been too exhausted to notice, which was possible, or some part of my nervous system was still calibrated to the station's absolute silence, still listening for things that were not sounds, still operating in the vigilant hair-trigger state that 2 weeks of Bravo 14 had built into me, which was probable, or something else, which I will not write down, which I have not written down because writing it down makes it a thought that exists outside my own head. And I am not ready for that. What I will write down is this. I got up from the kitchen table and walked to the bathroom and stood in front of the mirror and looked at my face for a long time. And then I watched my eyes. Not the shape of them, not the color, the movement. I stood there and I waited for them to blink on their own, involuntarily, without me deciding to make them do it. And the longer I stood there watching, the more I couldn't tell anymore whether what I was seeing was a reflex or a performance, whether the blinks I was producing were the unconscious biological maintenance of a living human eye, or whether some part of me had read that note and understood what to do and was simply doing it. I'm going to stop writing now. I need to think. If anyone else has worked at remote monitoring stations anywhere in the United Kingdom, particularly in the Northern Highlands, I would very much like to hear from you. Please tell me you blink.